Hey, everybody, welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intelligence Brief, where we give you the best of what we learned this week and the best of what we learned today. And we got a lot of both to cover today. A lot of things are happening. A lot of things are happening in Munich with the Munich Security Conference. A lot of things happening in the Persian Gulf. A lot of things happening in Europe with the Russia-Ukraine war. And we're going to cover it all today. Strap in, because here we go. First of all, let's start off with the Munich Security Conference, because Volodymyr Zelensky made his expected speech. Everybody was kind of focused on that, and he did not disappoint. Instead of talking about how he wants the war to come to an end and even hinting that maybe he's willing to make some concessions on territory or anything else to get the war over with, he doubled down on the reason the war started in the first place.
Europe needs Ukraine. The Ukrainian army is the strongest army in Europe. Thanks to our heroes. And it's simply, I think it's simply not smart to keep this army outside NATO.
Oh yeah. Let's keep let's put the army in NATO. So even at this late date, even though Russia has said from the outset and every day in between, every day throughout the last 4 years and everything before that, NATO and Ukraine equals war. And now then you're talking, after all of this stuff, after 13 months of President Trump being in office and saying, hey, let's try to find a way to get this war over with. Let's have all these meetings we've had, trilateral meetings, bilateral meetings, White House meetings, phone calls, all that stuff. He still says at the Munich Security Conference on the 14th of February, 2026, why shouldn't we be in NATO? How do you think that's going to go over in Moscow? It's just, I mean, it's not like it's going to make them mad. They're just going to shake their head and say, like I said, we'll just keep going on with our military. We'll keep moving forward. And that's, I mean, that's logically what they're going to do. And you saw that screenshot there, or the camera panned over to the crowd in Europe. Everybody's clapping. What a great idea that is. That shows you it's not just Volodymyr Zelensky who's lost his mind. And it's just his brain can no longer function. This is not an insult. This is an actual thing. His brain and his mentality has just become so ossified that it can't think of anything other than what it wants, and it cannot see rationally. This is one of the things I've been saying for a long time. This is not a new phenomenon. Of course, this is something that has been endemic in Volodymyr Zelensky. It's something President Trump should have learned in February of last year in the Oval Office when they had that big explosion. He should have recognized then he cannot be somebody that we can deal with. We cannot work with this guy to come up with a rational plan to bring the war to a conclusion. Therefore, the only rational thing for President Trump is to just move on from this. Now, it's a lot of political cost that would go along with that, domestic as well as international with our allies. Those are things that can be mitigated, but even our allies may clench their teeth. But if he comes up with a rational plan that says we're not going to underwrite failure anymore, we're not going to continue to throw billions of European euros into the trash to support a war for another 2 years, which they currently are on track to, that cannot be won, that cannot be avoided losing, we're not going to add to that. And even if you buy our missiles, that means that our stockpiles are going to continue to go lower because their need is greater than what we can produce. So I'm not, for the United States, going to continue to underwrite failure at my cost when I know that it won't result in a positive outcome. Or at least that's what he should say. We know pretty much by now, since he didn't do it in February of last year, it's pretty unlikely he's going to do it now, but that's what he should do. Well, Volodymyr Zelensky had other things to say in this Munich Security Conference. He also thought he'd weigh in on the other big hot spot that could be on the front side of a new war, and that's with Iran.
Today, the people of Iran expect from the world what we in Ukraine needed on February 24th, when the Russian invasion began: unity, determination, and speed. Of course, speed. Speed in support. And regimes like the one in Iran must not be given time. When they have time, they only kill more. They must be stopped immediately. And this is exactly what should have happened with the Ayatollah after all the wars his regime unleashed and all the lives it took.
Now that's actually kind of a 2-for-1 because it's actually part of the Russia-Ukraine war as well as Iran. But he's saying, listen, what's going on with Iran like now? Yeah, we have to go after them. And listen, almost certainly he was told to say that by his American backers. Hey, if you want our support, if you want our encouragement, and you don't want to make us mad, throw in this Iran stuff, because that's one of the major themes of the Munich Security Conference, which is kind of perverse because the Munich Security Conference is supposed to be about European security, and yet this is something that has no threat to Europe whatsoever, but we want everybody on board so that we can potentially start another war. More on that in just a minute. But let's keep it right there with Zelensky. He was almost certainly said, hey, you've got to go down on Iran. What does he otherwise care? Why would he even want to weigh in on that unless it's just to help build support? But he's trying to say, listen, let's just keep going down this path here so that what you should have done for us, by the way, and still can, that's his other subtle message, is that, yeah, give all this stuff and get ready to fight Iran and prepare weapons, ammunition, all this kind of stuff, because you have to go after them right now. You have to go after them hard, right? That's what he's saying. And so he's like, and let's keep doing the same to Russia. So even though you haven't done it in 4 years, according to his definition, let's do it now, and let's do it bigger, harder, faster, just like we're going to do with Iran. So let's actually do both at the same time. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, that's going to really work out well when we don't have enough industrial capacity to even support the one war in Ukraine with Russia. Now let's add another one, which could go also quite long. We can't do either one, but that seems to be lost on people because he keeps getting applause all the time. And there's so many people in that room. And this is one of the troubling things of this whole Munich Security Conference is there remains almost a disconnection from reality. If I'm blaming Zelensky, at least I can understand why. His country was attacked. The pressure's on him. I can't even come close to imagining of having all of those lives on your line and every decision you make probably resulting in more people dying. But if you say no and you go a different direction, it's incredible pressure because then the casualties will have been for nothing and all that stuff. That's one thing for it to be the head of the country where the life and death on every decision means your people. But if for Europe, it's not that way. And it actually continues to undercut their own security because they have to spend a whole lot more money, hundreds of billions of dollars more per country. And each country has to take its portion of that. And they have to, at the same time, they're shipping their stuff off to Ukraine to be thrown into the garbage. They're trying to create more, but they can't create them fast enough. So the net is lowering. They're lowering their capacity. They're lowering their readiness level. And they're lowering their ability to respond if they need to. That's the perverse part of this. And yet they just cheer themselves on. They're cheering themselves right into bankruptcy or oblivion or both. Well done. Well, let's move on a little bit more. Also staying at the Munich Security Conference, also staying on the topic of Iran that President Zelensky brought to the fore. Now, we're going to go here, brace yourself, to Lindsey Graham. That's coming up. And what you're going to hear him say is not a surprise. He's all about what can we do to kill somebody, this time Iran.
I think you do go after the oppressors. Kill the ones who kill the people. Their economy is in tatters. They've been beaten pretty badly. They're as weak as they can be, but they're still dangerous. Compare that to doing nothing. So these are your choices. You either execute a plan using military capability of the United States with Israel, working with people on the ground to bring the Ayatollah's regime down, or you do nothing but have talked. If the Ayatollah is still standing, Cristiano, when this is all over, it will be a disaster of generational proportions. He stood down the West. He did it yet again. And all the people who were on the fence will slowly be rounded up and killed over the coming years in Iran.
Did you notice the way he said when he was talking about if you don't do anything, if all you do is talk? He said that all you do is talk with the same just disgust that I use when I'm talking about what he's saying about war, about killing people. That's all he wants to do. He has this lust for it. And Lindsey Graham has this disgust for talking. And look, one of the 20th century's famous military leaders, Winston Churchill, the actual Winston Churchill, not the fake one in Zelensky, but the real one, he's famous to have said, meeting jaw to jaw is better than war. That's the actual quote, by the way. Not the jaw is better than war is often attributed to him. This is the actual quote from 1954. But you see, the guy who went to World War II in just not even a decade afterwards is saying that talking is always better than war. You should listen to the guy that actually fought a world war instead of the guy that hasn't fought anything, has never gone up against anybody in the United States, meaning the United States has gone up against anybody that can fight back other than with machine guns and rifles and IED roadside bombs. And that's something that we can handle. That could never threaten us. Only because we went into their backyards in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, Somalia, you name it, Nigeria, all these different places. Always against somebody who can't fight back. Now then you're possibly going against somebody that can fight back and has demonstrated that they can. And instead of recognizing that and saying, okay, well, I may want them to be away. I may just grind my teeth because I hate them and I don't want them to live. But if I go after them, they can kill my guys here. They can kill my allies here. They can kill the people that you claim to really love, the Israeli people. They can kill them too. None of which would happen if you don't launch a war. But if Zelensky is his mind is ossified and he can only see keeping on fighting and he just wants to win, Lindsey Graham has his mind ossified in, I just have to see Iranian blood flowing in the street. That's his only thing. That he is so myopically focused on that. He is oblivious and has blinded himself and is now seeking to blind others about the potential response that could come from this. Now, it's interesting because Lindsey Graham is saying don't talk, and he's laying down a hard marker here that you shouldn't have any kind of conversation at all. Don't even talk to him. But in that same interview there, he also threw down a marker to President Trump himself and said, now, if you talk and you have a bad deal and you have to bring that to the Senate for ratification, I won't support a bad deal. And of course, Lindsey Graham, no matter how much I may say he's a bad person and a bad leader and has bad ideas, he is a very powerful figure and he can influence the Senate, and especially among the Republicans, since they're in the ascendancy right now, that could be decisive. And so when he threatens President Trump, and read it the way it is, he threatened President Trump, if you reach a negotiated settlement that I don't like, then I'm not going to support it in the Senate. And so with the clear implication that if you think you're going to get rid of bypass the possibility of war by having a negotiated settlement, think again, because I will humiliate you that you'll get neither. You won't get any kind of a deal and you'll end up looking really bad. I think Lindsey Graham means that. I don't think that's an empty threat. Well, President Trump is in a huge bind right now because he's got to say, I think that he is getting all the right information. And I think that in the Pentagon, I think some of his leaders are actually telling him the truth that this is a dicey thing, Mr. President. It's probably not. I don't think it is dicey, but it looks like they're at least saying, hey, if we go in, there could be some real casualties, and I can't guarantee a success. And it definitely won't be a quick and easy thing like President Trump wants. I think that reality is coming into him, and now I think he's looking for a way out. Lindsey Graham is not offering him one. So far, though, also yesterday, President Trump said this about what his desires are.
What can Iran do to avoid attack? Give us the deal that they should have given us the first time. If they give us the right deal, we won't do that. But, historically, they haven't done that. I will say they want to talk, but so far they do a lot of talking and no action.
Yeah, a lot of talk. Well, actually, they're doing a lot of talking and they're willing to do action, but it takes, as you often say, two to tango. And so they're saying they're willing to talk about these things. They're willing to talk about this thing, plural, singular, and that is the nuclear enrichment capacity of their country. They will, of course, as I think Lindsey Graham mentioned, and others have also in recent days, we've been telling you the three major issues that are being demanded by the war lusters in our country are no nuclear enrichment, no support for any proxies, and no long-range missiles. So the three things there, that nobody in Iran could ever agree to. No government could ever agree to that, because you would literally be, and they have said this, signing your own death warrant, because if you eliminate your ability to strike back at your opponents, then you have made yourself vulnerable to just take a lot of missiles in the teeth, and you could never do anything about it. So no one in their right mind would ever do that. And Iran is not going to do that. Even if you hate their theocracy, if you hate their form of government, if you hate their policies, it doesn't make any difference in terms of what a country can do and what it can't do. And what Iran can't do is rationally and logically attack any other countries, because they know that the balance of power is against them. So they would not initiate something that they could not succeed, because that would be irrational. And what the Ayatollahs have shown from 1979 forward is that, however much you may not like them, they have shown themselves to be a very rational and calculating government who prioritizes regime survival above everything. And they do not have this some kind of blind lust to just attack and destroy Israel. Yes, they say death to Israel, death to America, the great Satan, and all that kind of stuff they have from the outset. We'll talk about why that may be later. But it does happen. But the question is that just rhetoric, or is it meaningful? You can't ignore the rhetoric, because if the rhetoric is matched with capacity and demonstrated intent, then you have a real problem. But if it's just rhetoric and the actions do not coincide and they do not line up, and the capacity doesn't exist for them to make good on destroying Israel, or the United States, then it's just kind of an eye-rolling rhetorical measure. That's all it is. If they can't do it, and they have never attempted to do it, and they don't have the capacity to do it, then you don't have to say, oh my God, they said death to America, go kill them all, which is Lindsey Graham's position. If we're going to be rational, logical, you just roll your eyes. It's the same as if some little kid comes up to Mike Tyson in his heyday, some 10, 12-year-old kid, 98 pounds, and says, I'm going to kick your ass. I'm going to come here, you chicken, come here. I mean, he would look at him like, are you serious? I mean, why would I do anything? Why would I even respond to that? You wouldn't even give it the time of day. You would walk along. If the kid came over and started slugging him, Mike Tyson wouldn't have even noticed it. He would be so strong. He would just be like swatting a fly, so he wouldn't even bother with it. That's the same thing we have here. Whatever Iran is saying, what is their capacity to do anything about it? And all of their capacity is built on defense. And that is where we are here. And that is why the rational thing for the United States to do is to take whatever deal we can get on the table. Trump has put himself in a bad position by demanding all of these things that he can't get. And now then, because of his own words, he's going to have to back down or ramp up into something that could be profoundly costly. So he's going to have a cost no matter what at this point. Either he's going to have a cost politically and domestically of his own making, because he's got Lindsey Graham and all of these folks that go along with him, this whole chorus I keep mentioning to you, that are from the inside, continue to press him to attack. And of course, you know from the Israeli side that he's taking pressure. He'll have to make those people unhappy, but you can deal with diplomatic and political unhappiness. But if you say, well, I don't want to deal with that unhappiness or the embarrassment that I can face, because his political enemies will no question jump all over it when it comes in time for the campaign season for the midterms this year, he'll have to deal with that too. He can't get away from that at this point. Now then, his choices are deal with that or ramp up and potentially deal with some real serious military consequences. And one of the people who answered some of this week was Jim Jatras, who took a look at what Iran could actually do.
Well, let's remember, when President Pezeshkian took power, he ran on a platform of moderation that he wanted to try to reopen dialogue with the West, especially with the United States. This was prompted by a lot of people in the Iranian business community. They'd have a lot to gain from that. I think 6 months ago, pretty well established to everybody in Iran that path is closed. That the idea that by restraining themselves, practicing moderation, that they somehow can open up a real dialogue with the Americans isn't going to work. So really now we're down to brass tacks. Either we come up with some kind of a deal that both sides can live with, which I think is very, very unlikely, or one side or the other is going to have to back down. And actually, that's going to be us. We'd have to either back down or proceed with something that would be then open-ended. I don't think a short, hard response from the Iranians to any American attack is going to reestablish deterrence. The other side is going to realize that this is for all the marbles, that we either have to proceed with a very, very devastating attack on Iran, and like we say, the Israelis might even use nuclear weapons, or we would have to back down and admit that Iran won, which I don't see either Mr. Trump or Mr. Netanyahu being willing to do.
Yeah, they may not be willing or desirous to do, but they may be put into a position where they can't. If Jim Jatras is right, that's a former U.S. diplomat, if he's right, and the Iranian side is viewing this as for all the marbles, meaning that if there's a war here, they don't have the luxury of backing down anymore, because they have calculated, and many analysts have said that this week on our show, that they realize that if we keep backing down, or if we keep having a deal to where it's just a little strike, a little symbolic strike here and there, it's going to continue on. And there won't be a stop. It'll just be the next one later on. And one of these times, one of these ways to undercut the regime and its economic output, its real, its currency, to try and debase that, it could finally bring it down. So they realize it is an existential threat, and it appears that they are prepared this time to say, no, this one is for all the marbles. If they have reached that conclusion, then the idea is, if we come in hard, that they're also going to strike back hard. And therein is the real question and why President Trump is in a squeezing window of his own making. Because he has said, from the Oval Office, I believe it was yesterday, that we have about a month. He has ordered a second aircraft carrier strike group. The Ford is steaming in there. That's to go along with the Abraham Lincoln and all the other combat power that's spread throughout the region at our other bases. 20 some odd bases have been bolstered in air defense capacity. They've been bolstered in offensive missiles and air power itself that can launch missiles from the air and shoot down Iranian missiles, etc. So all kinds of combat power is in the region there. More is coming. He said it would be about a month, is what he said. From what I can ascertain from other sources, the Ford will be on site somewhere around the 6th or 7th of March, somewhere around that period of time. It's plus and minus dependent on a lot of other factors, but that's roughly, we're talking about the first week, second week of March. So that means we have about that much time. Once that occurs and all of that combat power is, then all eyes will be on President Trump. By his own statement, he even said, I'm the one who's going to call the shot. So he's not hiding behind it. He is saying it, and he's correct there. So is his question about he's looking for negotiations now, which I just showed you, he said yesterday, is that because he actually wants to and he's thinking about it? Or is he just saying that, like we did in June of last year, to just keep Iran off guard and to just buy time publicly for getting the rest of that combat power in there and then launching? Either is possible. I certainly hope that he doesn't give this order, because it's just very little chance that it could even work out neutral, and a significant chance it could go really sideways and could end up really bad, because the offensive capacity that Iran has built over time allows it to strike back if it's hit and cause severe damage. And the reason why I said a minute ago that Iran is built on a defensive capacity, not an offensive, because it has the capacity to sustain a medium-term engagement, but it can't project power. So it can't go after Israel. It can't go after America. I mean, that's nonsensical. Obviously, they can't do that. They can't even go across that middle part of the Middle East, even to get to Israel. So all they can do is hit some missiles. And if all you have are offensive missiles that can reach a long way, you shoot them, and then what? Just like I said, the U.S. can't just use missile power to defeat Iran without a ground component to go in there. Neither can Iran destroy Israel or the United States unless they have a ground component that can go and seize territory, which they don't. Therefore, they are not an offensive threat, and an offensive in the terms of launching a war of conquest to try to destroy Israel or something like that. They can't do it. They don't have the capacity. They do have the capacity, though, to hit back and hit back hard. Now, if the thought is that we're going to have another 12-day war, something really short, and a lot of this combat power moving into the region, and with 150 C-17s and C-5, these massive military transports, that implies that we have built up a lot of ammunition and probably can sustain something for a solid 2 weeks, maybe even more than that. a pretty substantial fire. Now, the naval component is a different matter. It can go maybe 10 days to 2 weeks, and many of the ships are going to have to go back and reload because a lot of these missiles and these vertical launch tubes that they have to go to a port somewhere. It's really difficult to do in choppy seas, if not impossible. So that would have to go slower. So if you think, though, all right, well, we got a solid 2 weeks where we can just pound the holy hell out of Iran and that will conquer them, you're going to be in for real trouble. Number one, Iran knows this is coming, so they are as prepared as any army could ever be. They have looked at this for decades of time, especially even since June of last year. They have doubled down on understanding they have bunkers where they would spread out their leadership to make sure that they don't have, a single point of failure. They have, of course, their ammunition stockpiles, their missile stockpiles. A lot of them are underground. They can bring them out, fire them, pull them back in there. They have them, in addition, spread out. They have lots of air defense capability now, and it would be probably very expensive for us to try to go after them all. And if we think that we're going to get it done in a couple of weeks and then that's going to be it, Professor Morandi, a Iranian expert and an Iranian military veteran, explained to us that's not the case. Can Iranian missiles and drones last beyond 14 days?
Yes, Iran can do this for months. The long-range missiles that were used against the Israeli regime, that's the sideshow. The real capabilities are what is directed at the United States, because ever since the United States came and invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, the Iranians have been preparing themselves. I have no doubt that at the end of the day, this will bring down Trump's presidency, and it will bring about great change in the United States. And people in the United States won't be fooled by any claims about Iran. Iran is at the negotiating table. People see what the Epstein files are revealing to them, who's really in charge in the United States. This is not the United States of 20, 30 years ago, and this is not Iran of 20, 30 years ago. I certainly do not want war. I hate war. I fought in war. I've been to Lebanon, Iraq, Syria many times. War is a horrible thing. But if the United States imposes war, for Iran, it will be an existential fight, and they will hit as hard as possible. And I have no doubt that the United States is simply incapable of stopping Iran.
Now, as an Iranian veteran, you can certainly understand his hyperbolic comments about some of those things, like it would bring down the Trump administration and lots of other things. I don't know. I can't say that he's wrong on that, but you can understand his comments on that. Professor Morandi is a pretty balanced person, which is why we had him on the show. He definitely comes from an Iranian perspective, but we want people to see what the Iranian perspective is. But let's look through whatever the incentives are and the motivations and just look at what is said. And a lot of the things she says is quite plausible because we have built ourselves on this premise that the United States is the most powerful military in the history of the world. And if we attack and it turns out that it's not quite that way, we have another problem. And in fact, just yesterday, let me show you this. Gary, we're going to go a little out of order here. Just yesterday, President Trump talked about how he's going to have a $1.5 trillion defense budget next year. And in the process of explaining why he's going to do that, talks about how no one's going to challenge us.
As long as I'm president, we will be the best led, the best trained, the best equipped, the most disciplined, and the most elite fighting force the world has ever seen. That's what we've turned out to be, and everybody knows it. They all know it. Every country knows it. I speak to all of them. They know exactly what they would be up against. Hopefully we'll never have to test them. And because of our strength and because of what we do, we probably won't have to be tested. That's why this year we're investing also $1 trillion in our armed forces, most we've ever spent. And next year it's being raised. In fact, we're going to be building a number of battleships. You ever hear of battleship? You know, World War II, you saw those big ships, the Iowa, the Alabama, the Missouri, they're going there, sailing through that water like it's nothing. Those big waves are crashing into the front.
Yeah, that's kind of cringeworthy. Because you hear him saying, we have this big, powerful armada, this great military, $1 trillion, like more than the next 10 countries in the world combined. And that includes China and Russia. And he says because it's so strong, no one's going to test us. if we don't attack anybody, no one is going to test us. China is not going to start a war with us. Russia is not going to start a war with us. Neither of them have any interest or motivation to do so. Unless we attack somebody like Iran, no one is going to test us. And you can keep this fiction going a long time that we're the greatest in the world, etc. There's reason to argue that we're not. I argue vehemently that right now, it's, in terms of land power, it's the Russians. In terms of missile and air power, it's the Chinese. But we have a great deal of power. We have the ability to transport power and project it all over the world better than either of the Russians or Chinese. But if we go into their front yard, if we go into the Iranian front living room and say we're going to take our stuff into you and have an attack, then we leave Iran no choice, but they will attack. And they have capacity to get through our air defenses. And they have, at least by reports, some modest ability to an air defense, and it's unproven right now. But on paper, it's possible that they could knock down some of our aircraft if we start coming in, because to do what President Trump is talking about, or what a lot of these experts are saying we would do in Iran, you're going to have to get into their airspace. A lot of things you can do from the end. You can fire a lot of missiles from beyond the range of their air defense, which is what happened in the 12-day war last year. You can do a lot of that. But if you want to do what's talked about here with the servicing these targets all over the place, especially coming in from the two aircraft carriers, you're going to have to get into their airspace and into the range of some of the air defense missiles. By many reports, the U.S. attack in June of last year against Iran was a gentleman's agreement that we told them we're going to hit the Fordo and the Isfahan sites, and then you can fire at our Qatari side as a response afterwards, and we'll be done. We won't have to have into a war. And apparently both sides agreed to that, meaning that we did not test their air defense. The claim is that both the United States and Israel obliterated all of their air defense, and a lot of it was knocked out, especially by the Israeli side prior to at the beginning of the 12-day war. But the idea that none of that stuff functioned when the U.S. came in may not be accurate. Now, I can't say for sure, so I don't know. So it remains to be proven. But I would not want to risk my life as a pilot to find out. But we may if we get into this. And President Trump, and then I think that circles back to what Professor Morandi was talking about, that it could bring down his presidency. If he makes that big brash statement that he made on that video clip I just showed, as well as others, that we're the most incredible military power in the history of the world, and then all of a sudden it turns out that we can't defeat Iran, then it's going to expose the reality of it. Now, Larry Johnson tells us a lot that that we've already exposed it with trying to go out the 7-week operation to try to quell the Houthis. In 2025, that failed, and so we just stopped because we didn't want to, embarrass ourselves or spend the money to try and do the militarily unattainable. So we just walked away, said, "Yep, they begged for a peace offering. We gave it to them anyway. Moving on." And you can do that then. You can't do this one here because Iran has profoundly more capabilities in both missiles, missile defense, and drones, much, much, much more than the Houthis had. Let's hope we don't have to find out, because I think that it could be very, very bad for the United States. And as I've said too many times, let me repeat one last time. There is nothing to gain. There is no justification for us starting a war, no need to do so, and great, great risks that it could go south if we try. Now, speaking of Larry Johnson, he mentioned one thing earlier this week on the Russia-Ukraine war, and as we're closing in on the 4-year anniversary of that awful war, that terrible date on the calendar is coming up, the question is, how much longer can the Ukraine side go? Larry addressed it.
Let me ask you a question. How long did it take, if you had a new recruit that spent 13 weeks in basic training, how long did it take them to be trained to operate as part of a tank crew?
Several months, six months or so, if you really trained them hard after they got back.
My point in that is there is the complete vulnerability of Ukraine. Because not only do they not have the luxury of putting new recruits that have been kidnapped off the streets through 13 weeks of basic training, but then they don't get the months of advanced individual training that they must have to operate either a tank or Bradley fighting vehicle or an artillery piece or drone, so you go through.
And I'm sorry, when I said 6 months, I'm talking about after the advanced individual training, and they get into the unit, and then
okay,
ready.
yeah,
That's
so
on top of what you just said.
Yeah, so that's where people, I think the average folk listening at that don't understand that. The amount of training that is required to produce a soldier that can be marginally effective in combat. You also have to have a secure place where you can do training.
Right.
There's not a secure place left in Ukraine. Russia can reach out and touch them wherever they are. How long can Ukraine continue to just pour untrained personnel into this cauldron of death? And, at some point it will break. They cannot sustain it. Nobody can. And that's where I think Russia has now they've made the decision. They're going to work as hard as they can to make it unsustainable, to compel them to surrender.
There's so many people, we showed just some of these earlier this week as well, that want to keep bragging on the Ukraine side and their amazing resilience. David Petraeus made a comment yesterday about how resilient the people are, and they can just keep going. This is at the Munich Security Conference. A lot of people are saying that because that's what they want to be true. But Larry's talking about, we never know how long it's going to be broken. Many of the advocates for continued resistance on the Ukraine side mock anybody who's like us, who has said, that we don't know how much longer they can go. At some point that the military is going to break, or it just will not be able to sustain itself as an effective fighting force. And they say, well, it hadn't happened. It hadn't happened. But look how long it's taken Russia to take this much territory. And then they want to claim that Russia has 1.2 million casualties or something like that. And they say, oh, it's just a matter of time until finally the Russians get worn down. And they don't stop to think about the irrational and the illogic of what they're saying. You're saying that someday that the Russians may suffer enough casualties that all of a sudden they can't keep this going, even though that the Ukraine side has taken a lot more casualties. Their industrial capacity has almost been wiped out, just knocked down to next to nothing. Their industrial capacity is gone. Their ability to heat is gone. The people can't even live in their major cities. And somehow they're still maintaining viable defense capacity. But there's this magical thought that the Russians, from a position of strength and power today, may someday in the future somehow get worn down so much that they will do what the Ukraine side hasn't and just give up and just quit. So just keep going, because the resilience on the Ukraine side can go. Whatever's happened in the last 4 years, hell, it can go another 4 years. Just keep going. Yay, let's get some applause lines going here. But that's not likely. That's not rational. That's not logical. The logical thing, the rational thing, is that Russia hasn't even gone to mobilization, forced mobilization, beyond that first one in 2022. That one-time situation to because they realized that they were they'd screwed themselves because they didn't have resource for a plan B, which they had to go to after plan A to try to force a negotiated settlement at the beginning. That failed, so they didn't have a resource plan B, so they had to mobilize a bunch of people to get it done. Since that time, they have convinced their population that this is an existential fight for them, and that they have had enough through recruitment to be able to keep the war going and to keep their army growing. It's now 500,000 people, bigger today than it was when they attacked. And that's with all the casualties. Whatever the actual number is, it's almost certainly not 1.2 million, but whatever the real number is, they have been able to sustain those casualties and add more people in, such that they have 500,000 more on their active rolls. Now, who do you think is going to wear out first? The side that can't replace the losses and is running short on people because most have fled or died, and others are being forced into conflict, and they don't have a chance to train them up, or the side that has hundreds of thousands that have the luxury of training up for many months and rotating in and out so that they don't get worn out, and they haven't even gone to the mobilization. In the event that they started suffering real losses, they can mobilize. They can start doing sometime in the 5th year of war what Ukraine has been doing since the outset. Think about that for a minute. It's just illogical what we're asking to do. And of course, the biggest bill payers remain the people of Ukraine, the fighters on the front line that are sent in most cases to certain death. It's just almost a death sentence to be sent to the front lines. Once they get captured, that's just almost all that's left. Your life is basically over. The line continues to go at a slow pace, but it keeps going to the west. And at some point, no one can predict, definitely not me, At some point, the integrity of the forces, despite their best efforts and their greatest resilience, it just can't maintain that. It's going to tear somewhere. And at that point, the Russians have the numbers and they can roll it into there. I don't know why they haven't. Many people say since they haven't done it, they can't. I don't see that. I see that they have chosen not to for reasons that I don't understand. But what we do know is that they have the capacity to do it, and they have the capacity to just maintain this. Even if they did never change their strategies and tactics, it is eventually inevitable that they're going to do this, and at profound cost to the Ukraine side. That's just where we are, folks. Well, listen, we're going to keep monitoring this. Anything else happens in the Munich Security Conference, any other big things, you can certainly count on getting those Monday morning. If anything happens anywhere in the world of a breaking nature, come to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We will be here ready for you. Thanks very much, folks, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, I don't try to talk you into buying gold or tell you how to run your stock portfolio, but there is a way you can help us. Subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with somebody you love.